Hey folks, and welcome to the Deconstructor of Fun podcast. I'm your host today, Mishka Katkoff, and in this episode, I have the pleasure of talking to Peter Hansen, who is the co-CEO of Hutch. Now, Peter has over a decade of experience at Hutch. He's held some very interesting roles like Chief Financial Officer as well as Chief Revenue Officer at the company. And in this podcast, he really shares intriguing stories behind Hutch's popular racing games like Top Drives as well as F1 Clash. We also talk about some of the games that did not become so big in the end because there's a lot of learnings in whatever doesn't become a hit. Anyways, in this episode, we dive deep into Hutch's unique approach to game development. We talk about the importance of building strong relationships with car manufacturers for licensing and the evolving strategies that have driven Hutch's growth throughout the test of time. Now, this episode is perfect for two kind of groups. One is, of course, people interested in game development, and the other one who are interested in how to manage long-term partnerships with major brands. I don't think you can get any bigger brands than car brands. Yeah, I don't think you can. So a lot of learnings, a lot of detailed learnings on that. Now, before we kick it off and talk with Peter, I don't have requests. I have a suggestion. If you're watching this on YouTube, please consider subscribing. That helps us a lot, and we have podcasts coming in every week, at least twice a week. So you'll be seeing all of our new episodes in your feed, and perhaps some will, be enjoyable for you. And secondly, if you haven't signed up to our newsletter, it's time to do so. So the newsletter has been popping for quite a while. We got amazing content creators, a group of game industry professionals from marketing, from game design, for product management, you name it. If you want to read insightful stories about game development, short versions, as well as having all the links to our upcoming events and all that cool stuff that is happening in the game industry, check out the subscription link in the description below. So those are the two suggestions. And without further ado, let's hop into the episode. This podcast is brought to you by Data AI. Now, you're asking, didn't they get acquired by Sensor Tower? They did, and that's awesome. Here's why. Whether you loved using Data.ai or Sensor Tower, the combined company will offer customers even stronger and more detailed insights on the full digital customer journey. Exciting times lie ahead as Sensor Tower and Data AI join forces. Go to Data.ai or SensorTower.com and get on board with undeniably the best data partner in the business. Now, back to the episode. Peter, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, Peter, I'm going to do a quick introduction of you. So, Peter Hansen-Chambers, you're a co-CEO, newly appointed co-CEO. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Newly appointed co-CEO of Hutch, which is a 13-year-old mobile gaming studio owned by MTG Group. You have around 175 employees, and you're headquartered out of London. The studio focuses and has always focused on racing and different variations of racing games. You're known for games like F1 Clash, Top Drives, Forza Customs, Rebel Racing. I remember DraftKings, but that wasn't maybe the biggest success, but it was a very nice looking game. And previously, you've been with Hutch for almost a decade, and you were previously Chief Finance Officer and Chief Revenue Officer. Did I get all the facts right?
Yeah, that's right. I think you mean Race Kings, right?
Yeah, Race Kings. Was it
yeah.
Race King? It wasn't DraftKings,
Yeah,
but it
yeah.
was about drafting, right?
It
Or
was
drifting.
drifting. That's right. Yeah, that was. I think we launched that in 2016, 2017, long time ago now. But
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, no, it was, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Well, I remember that because it was we've met a couple of times before when I was still working at Rovio, visited your studio, and I remember the story of Drift King and Top Drives, and the story was that you had a very specific launch process, just like most studios have. This is how we make games. This is how we launch games. You put in X amount of time, and you were really focused on day 7 number. And Drift King had, I think, the best day 7 number that you've seen at the company till date, or till that point. And you really put everything behind that game, and it flopped because the retention actually didn't stay much past day 7. And then you were also making top drives at that point, and top drives had, I believe, the worst day seven number that you've experienced in the company. But being an independent company, not having the same type of financial backing as you do right now, you were pretty much forced to launch top drives, despite that it didn't reach the internal metrics that you had for launching a game. And that became the biggest game that Hutch has ever shipped. It was then done a different version of that. It was F1 Clash, and then pretty much that kind of led to the acquisition of MTG and the success that you had as a company. But it took the failure of Drift Kings to launch top drives to become the success that you are right now. Am I
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting, really strange story, I guess. As you said, I don't think many people would have launched top drives on the face of it. Um, but it was a really interesting creative time because we were working on Race Kings. Being honest, we were trying to sort of eat into CSR's market. It was meant to look great, meant to feel great. Um, and yeah, it looked great, like a great game, but it just wasn't a great business, and unfortunately didn't succeed, which was it hurt, but we learned a lot from that, and I think that failure did actually help the business hugely in terms of its growth subsequently. The Top Drives was strange because Top Drives just quietly went about his business. In a way, it was kind of quite a, I don't know, like an anorak project. In it was something I was really passionate about, and Johnny, who's the chief creative officer, was really passionate about, and we were like, oh, this would be so cool if we could do this, and yeah, the initial KPIs were not good at all, but there was this weird energy, this sort of community aspect that really sort of made us think maybe there are some people out there that get it, and yeah, thankfully we were free to take those risks. But it's been a great game. It's awesome. I still love it. I still think it's got loads of potential. So yeah, no, it's a great story.
And part of running a, a studio that is focused on car games, especially car games with real cars, is definitely the IPs, the licensing, working with these brand holders or car manufacturers, if you will. How does that work? Like, I mean, let's say Top Drives is an example. There are so many cars there. Do you need a permission for every single car and car model, or how does that
Yeah.
operate?
Yeah, so I mean, I had a background of licensing for video games for quite some time. In particular, like racing games. I've worked on the Colin McRae Dirt franchise and the Toka Touring Car Race Driver series with Codemasters. Then I worked some others. I worked with Sony on Drive Club and Singer with CSR. So I'd had this background. I knew what we needed to do. Top Drives was actually quite an interesting project because we had to break the model a little bit with that, and the manufacturers, as I say, were all quite used to working in a certain way. Normally, sort of any game in the past, you would have, you'd probably want to launch it with at least 50 cars, maybe a few more, maybe a few less, but you're probably talking to, I don't know, a maximum of like 20 manufacturers. Maybe you're licensing two or three cards from them, and the model was quite established. But for Top Drives to work, we needed quantity, and we also needed real variety of cars. We didn't just want, the US muscle car and the sort of hypercars. We wanted everything from, a Volvo estate to, sort of, Rover Metro, something that was really unsexy, but I'd say really got into the sort of whole car enthusiast world. And so we were approaching car manufacturers and literally asking, can we license everything in your catalog? And so it did challenge them because they had to rethink their model, and we had to persuade them quite, we had to be quite persuasive about, the concept and the chance of success and why this was interesting. And thankfully, quite a few got on board early doors. I think we initially launched the game with about 750 cars, and having sort of established it with, a good sort of baseline of cars, we were able to then sort of persuade the others to join, and obviously the game started to succeed, so it made it easier. But yeah, I mean, there's conversations ongoing now between us and car manufacturers sort of all the time, and either we're signing additional content or we're extending the existing deals that we have. Yeah, but I think for a game like Top Drives, it was great because there were certain manufacturers who were never able to get representation in any video game because they weren't perceived as attractive enough, and we break that mold a little bit. And our car audience, there's nostalgia in there. There's sort of guilty pleasures. There's all sorts of things that you find in that game. As well as the sort of red-blooded, poster cars that sort of everybody loves. So yeah, no, it's fun.
You've heard of Heroic Labs by now, and we keep talking about them because in today's mature market, you need every edge to be successful. Rather than spending those precious company dollars on building game tech, focus on building your game and shipping it. Get into your players' hands faster and grow your community. Heroic Labs is battle-tested partner and friend of the podcast. Their tech enables you to be flexible, creative, and scale for success. Heroic Labs has your tech stack covered. Whether you're looking for a world-class back-end game server, an amazing game development framework, fantastic live ops tooling, or reliable mass scalability, Heroic Labs has solutions for all of these challenges. And it's not just us at Deconstructor of Fun praising Heroic Labs. The company works with some of the world's biggest publishers on many of the beloved games. Focus on your game, save a big chunk of cheese, and avoid tech risks with Heroic Labs. What's the, when you're talking to different car manufacturers, is there, you have to talk to them individually, or is there like a middleman in between?
It varies. So a lot of the deals that we do are direct. But there are some of the manufacturers have licensing agencies involved, and that representation can change over time. But yeah, some of them you have to work for an agent, which, to be honest, for the most part, it works fine. I think it just depends how creative your project is. If you're really trying to innovate, I find normally it's easier to make headway with a manufacturer directly, just because you can really help them to sort of understand where you're going. It's a little bit difficult when you're talking to a middleman and then they're talking to, somebody gets lost. But generally, yeah, that's the way it works.
What's the approval process like? It's good that we're talking about IPs and car brands, and you're sitting with a Formula One, Ferrari, shirt with like so many IPs on it. Like, what is that approval process like? When you're putting in a Formula, or let's say you're putting in a Ferrari, they have to look at everybody else. Say like, our car, like whatever stats you have, it has to be maxed out, like, because it's like creme de la creme.
It's interesting. I mean, that was when we started doing Top Drives, and obviously it's a very stat based game. Yeah, some of the manufacturers were a little bit twitchy about, hang on a minute, it's going to be really black and white, like an, Audi RS4 versus a BMW M3 and that sort of thing. And, but yeah, I mean, the way that we just persuaded them that, look, a lot of this stuff is out there in the public domain anyway. If I was really that bothered, I could find it. And ultimately, brands go beyond those sort of black and white performance figures anyway. But I would say sort of generally, yes, the approval process can be, it is an important condition of any deal that you sign with them. Some of the car manufacturers or some of the brands that you'll work with are more, laissez-faire than others, and are kind of willing to sort of, oh yeah, it looks great, let's start going. And they might be really busy, or they might not have so many concerns, whereas there are sort of other manufacturers that are really all over it, and they want to see everything, from every single angle, and they want to understand the sort of greater context of the product. And yeah, without naming names, some can be quite particular about it, and it takes a bit more energy. But then these brands are important to them, to the manufacturers, and they're obviously important to us as well, which is why we're licensing them. So we're going through
Of
it.
course. And were there anything that were off limits? Like not this model. Like this is
There are
unique.
certain, yeah, well, yeah, that stuff can change over time. So there have definitely been times where certain car manufacturers will be very precious about a specific model. For instance, in the past, Nissan has been very, very cautious around the Skyline because it is their sort of halo car, and so yeah, there'll be certain things that they will or won't allow you to do. But then I say, in a way, those things change. New people come in, and then they have a different opinion about how a brand or product, should be marketed, and yeah, these things definitely change. It is quite difficult sometimes with that because you could be working with the manufacturer for a long time and everything's fine, and then all of a sudden a new CEO comes on board, and literally we've had this. A new CEO comes on board and they'll say, "We don't want to feature old old models of our back catalogue in games." And be like, "Why?" Because the fans love it, and they're like, "Yeah, we just want to focus on new product." And I mean, it's difficult, but obviously it's their choice. Um, but in general, they're good. And I mean, in terms of off limit stuff, I mean, the manufacturers, if we're just talking about cars specifically, like manufacturers are always quite cautious about safety, so they don't like things to blow up. They don't like reliability to be an issue. So there's some of the manufacturers do provide you with a list of you can't do these things, but it's not too difficult, to be honest. I mean, I've worked on some games where there's been a lot of damage, and a lot of them have been pretty relaxed about it. So I think if it's in the spirit of racing and it's like perceived as being organized racing, then they're pretty cool about it. If it's a bit more like if it's like a Grand Theft Auto, you're racing in the streets, you've got police chasing you, that sort of thing. I think some of the manufacturers will be quite difficult about that.
I understand. I understand. I mean, if you watch like the latest John Wick, there's a lot of car damage done in addition to enormous amount of homicide at the same time. But they feel, it's I think it's yeah how you portray it.
I was just going to say, so some of the films, obviously there are different departments of the manufacturers that are paying for product placement. So, funnily enough, you can get situations where a certain manufacturer is quite difficult about a video game, but that they've paid for product placement in a film that's probably a much worse depiction, but big companies.
Yeah, I think they pay a lot for James Bond. Wasn't that the case? But yeah,
For
and
sure.
he doesn't treat his cars,
No,
always so nicely.
that's true.
There's
We don't last
barely
very
anything
long.
left of them. Yeah. This podcast is brought to you by AppsFlyer. In today's digital world, understanding your app's journey from discovery to download is more than just insightful, it's essential. Enter AppsFlyer, the leader in mobile attribution and marketing analytics that allows you to measure the full potential of your marketing efforts, making every ad dollar work smarter. With AppsFlyer, that's your new reality. Dive deep into data-driven insights that reveal exactly where your users come from and how they interact with your app. AppsFlyer, where your app's potential meets performance. But how do you approach these? The license holders that you work with are gigantic. They have these, magnificent brands that the whole world knows. How do you approach them as a small developer? Like you started off pitching to them long before you were working with MTG. Even the F1 deal came before MTG. So how
That's
do
right.
you
Yeah.
how do you approach these license holders?
Um, I mean, I think the big brands, don't mean it like that. I mean, like the brand, non-car manufacturer brands are probably pitched a bit differently. The car manufacturers, for the most part, I think there's an established model, and for the most part, if you're willing to work within that model, it's relatively straightforward to license, providing, as I say, you can work within their guidelines and obviously commit to their obligations. Um, uh, there are certain manufacturers where they're very popular. So, as I said to you, there are certain cars, there are certain products where they will almost be in every game. And so it's, I know some of the manufacturers have been kind of overwhelmed, and they might need a bit more persuasion to try and understand, why is this game different to anything else? I'm in Need for Speed, I'm in CSR. Why do I need to be in anything else? And I think, that's where that sort of creative point of difference is quite important. And maybe the way that you're going to position their brand or their cars will be important. Um, and obviously, I think the caliber of the team. I think like our team, the developer in question. Why should they get involved with us? And at the time, we were able to sort of talk about the experience that we had as a group of people making games. We had experience on a lot of other products using licensed content, and so that obviously breeds confidence. If I'm looking at a product, a brand or a license outside of car manufacturers, then yeah, I think it very much depends. Like, what is the motivation of the partner that you're working with? Like, what can you add? I think with Formula One, for instance, we spoke to them for probably a year, maybe 18 months before we did the deal with them. I think we did the deal in about mid 2018. I personally had worked with Formula One in the past. I'd done a deal with Bernie Eccleston for Formula One at Codemasters. So I kind of knew what they needed, and it wasn't the first thing I did when we went to Hutch. I mean, when we were at Hutch, we were kind of working on it with different products, different audiences, but we very quickly, I think, created a coherent strategy for where we were taking the business. And racing was our focus. The car audience was our focus, and Formula One, obviously being the biggest motorsport, was felt a very obvious target for us at some point. But I think for us, it's always been about, how do we grow the pie? It's very difficult to compete against the very biggest players. There is a huge amount spent on art. The teams are massive. The games look amazing. And I think, we being a very small independent studio, knew that it was going to be quite difficult to compete, on that front. And so we took the fight in a different way. We decided that actually, for us, it was, how do we make, we kind of felt that racing and cars were sort of underserved in mobile. And so for us, it was like, how can we deliver an experience that people can engage with this content that they enjoy, and do it in such a way that is maybe complementary or distinct to some other products out there, which is why we came up with Top Drives initially. And then I think it was like a similar approach really with F1. With F1, we really wanted to offer a mobile first experience, something that didn't rely on like dexterous skill, and something that was very different to the F1 console game that was out there, which obviously is fantastic. But I don't think people really want to play, a console experience on a phone. I mean, there might be people, but there's probably quite a small subset. And for us, it was, as I say, taking it to a wider audience. And so that really was our pitch to Formula One. And I think, it was at a time when, we knew that the ownership had changed. Their objectives were to grow the sport. And so we very much sort of fed that, into our pitch about, how we could help to, expand the audience. for F1 gaming on mobile, and I think it resonated really well. Um, Obviously, there was some risk on our part. We did some validation, some prototyping. We felt pretty good about the direction that we were going in. But yeah, nothing's ever a sure thing until you launched. And yeah, the game was a huge success, and obviously that's bred confidence. We've now had a relationship with them for a long time, continuing to work with them, and I think success breeds confidence, and when you've got that, then we've had other people approach us and sort of said, "Oh, we've seen what you've done with Top Drives. We've seen what you've done with F1. We'd love you to have to work with us on this." And sometimes it's the right, brand. Sometimes it's not, or sometimes it's not the right time. Um, but um, but yeah, Forza was kind of a similar. That was kind of partly how it came about. We actually were approached by Turn 10, and that was probably 2019, early 2019. And it was quite a long conversation because I think initially they were approaching us for a work for hire, and they were probably approaching lots of other studios, and I think we maybe surprised them by telling them we were not interested in work for hire, but we love Forza. It was again another, if you're looking at racing and car, audiences and sort of media, Forza is up there as one of the biggest, and so we engaged in a conversation with them. We explained the way that we sort of approached making games, the way that we wanted to make games. I think they were really surprised. It was obviously completely different to the way that they approach games. Um, and yeah, that very much started off as a conversation, and we had multiple conversations. And really, it was like getting to know you. We were talking about how we'd made Race Kings. We talked about the failure. We didn't hide it. We talked about Top Drives, talked about F1, talked about Forza in terms of our ideas, our understanding. All the time being humble because we don't know their brand as well as they do. And then yeah, we got into a situation where they really wanted us to sort of pitch for it, and we kind of found a different way of working, which was effectively we were licensing the brands from them and making the game and publishing it as a Hutch game. Um, and Again, sort of similar to what I said about F1, it was we were very much approaching it from a mobile first perspective. We wanted to innovate. We wanted to sort of test some things and see how could we you know bring the brand to life um, in a non-obvious way. And it was probably couldn't have been any less obvious, I think, than working with Match Three, as some people have told us. But I say we went through a process of prototyping and validating, and it performed really well. We worked on it a long time, and yeah, I mean it's great to get it out there. Great to get some real data, see people playing it, enjoying it, and yeah, we've got big plans.
Yeah, interestingly enough, Forza and Chrome Valley Customs from Space Ape, which is a studio located like about 5 blocks away from
No,
where
I've
your studio
never
is.
never heard of Space Ape or Chrome Valley Customs.
I'm just wondering. A lot of coffee shops, a lot of conversations going around. So no, it's we in games like everybody tends to have same ideas. That's not a not a
Yeah, I
weird
mean,
thing,
I
but
mean, I think there was actually another title out there that had tried to do something like this quite a while ago, and not it hadn't really worked. I honestly don't know how this happened, and I'm sure Simon is asking himself the same question. But yeah, we were pretty surprised, as I'm sure they were. But you know, I take it as a compliment, and I'm sure they do too.
yeah, same ideas. And so when it comes to pitching your company to the key license holder, is to kind of summarize it, is it more focusing on understanding what the license holder is looking for, and then formulating your pitch rather than coming with constantly, with the pitch first.
I personally think that's where you have most success. And that's normally the way that I try and approach things, trying to understand what their objectives, what are they trying to get out of it. Obviously, some of this stuff is in the media, and I say like Formula One, it was Liberty being really open about their objectives and their vision. So, we were able to sort of leverage that. But I think, you know, we had a similar experience to the ports with Mattel and Hot Wheels. And I think the first time we spoke to Hot Wheels, I think we kind of engaged in that conversation just thinking, I'm not sure where we go with this. Like, I'm not sure that's the right brand for us. Um, and the more we spoke with them and the more we got to understand the brand, the more we could see actually this is quite interesting, and actually it just works. It just felt at a really good time for us because there was something that we were working on that we could see could be a really good fit. But yeah, I mean, I think you have to the best executions are the ones where there is respect on both sides for what it is that you're trying to make, rather than it just being a case of like the developer sticking brand on the box, or the licensor just taking the money. It's the potential is much bigger than that, and hopefully they breed the best sort of long-term relationships as well.
Yeah, yeah, of course, makes sense. So before pitching, understand what the other side is actually interested in buying, and then formulate around that and build a relationship around the shared goals of both parties. When it comes to working with the license holder, in this case, these car manufacturing companies, what do developers need to offer? Like, what is the day to day, the month to month, and what is expected of a developer?
I think I would say it varies dramatically. I mean, we've got I honestly have lost track how many car manufacturers we've licensed now, uh, but we've probably got 100 different car manufacturers now licensed. You probably didn't know that many existed, but yeah, they vary. I mean, some of you've got the big manufacturers like the big American, Ford, GM, that sort of thing, and obviously these are huge companies. They've done a lot of licensing. They will they will be able to provide things like CAD data for certainly their most recent models, and they will expect you to go through a quite defined approval process. Um, and so, I mean, I think the most important thing I could advise is 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 really on you, the developer, as opposed to um, that the manufacturer is not going to ask you this. But I think the best thing is always to avoid surprises. So context is quite important. There are video games and there are video games, and if you think something's quite got the potential to be controversial, I would advise that you pitch it, and you pitch it in the most positive way that you can in advance, rather than wait for them to find this out later. And you know I've had situations in the past where I've consulted for companies in the past, and they've created, they've built the game, they've got the approval for the model, and they've created a marketing video, and the marketing video is just about ready to go out. They've shared it with the manufacturer, and they've said, what the hell is this? This doesn't. And it's, oh, the game's developed, and the design evolved, and they never kept them up to date, and that's where sort of issues can arise. But generally, I think if you sort of retain a dialogue, then it sort of avoids those sort of things, and you can mitigate sort of early on. But generally, I say the manufacturer doesn't really, in their head, a lot of these people that you're working with are not gamers. A lot of these people might not even care about games, which might disappoint some people. But they could be licensing all sorts of things from bed sheets to, um, you know, very expensive pens. I don't know what, but it's a varied role for some people. So that they won't necessarily understand the intricacies of a game, and you've got to kind of keep them up to speed. The bigger manufacturers, they will have sort of dedicated licensing people, but then you'll work with also smaller manufacturers, and they can go one of two ways. They can be either really, they can be almost so enthusiastic that they just want to be involved in everything because they want to understand like your physics model and how you represented the suspension exactly the way that all this sort of thing. And some of that could be really helpful. Like, there have been games in the past I've worked on where it's been super helpful to have somebody to sort of consult with on certain dynamics and this and that, and the dev team have loved it. I've also seen where it can be quite difficult and almost it's too high maintenance, but quite often the smaller manufacturers are very busy and they're small operations, and sometimes the challenge can be just getting them to respond, and because they're doing lots of other things. So it kind of depends. I say there's some where it's once they've signed the license deal and they're getting paid, they don't really care. And then there'll be others that I say will be wanting to understand whether their car is performing exactly how it does in the real world, and so they'll be kind of enthusiastically engaging with you on that. So it's definitely a mixed bag.
Yeah. So basically, adjust the proper level communication based on the need of the license holder.
Definitely.
Step into the future of game monetization with Xsolla. Xsolla empowers developers and publishers to market, sell, connect, and optimize their games globally. From payment solution to a full suite of tools designed to grow your game's revenue while fostering a loyal player base. Xsolla is your game's gateway to worldwide success. With Xsolla, the world is your playground. Visit xsolla.com today and find all the solutions that will help you to power your games into success everywhere. And when you're working with these license holders, so in this case, of course, the car manufacturers, and combining cars and games should be fun, but how do you find the fun when you're working with these partners, especially with the more engaged ones?
Sorry, how do I find the fun?
Yeah. I mean, like working with the brands, like is the goal to? I mean, the goal of a game is to be fun, and when you're working with the IP holder, like how important is for them that you're finding the fun of the game together, or are they just disengaged with that?
I think it really varies. I think for the most part, from our point of view, obviously we're pitching it as a fun, exciting, innovative experience often, and we will very much be trying to talk it up energetically and getting them to sort of really buy into it, and using sort of key arts to try and sell that experience and kind of give them a window into what it is. And some of the car manufacturers will really buy into that, and they'll be excited about that. Some of them will, some of them are gamers, and some of them will have opinions, and they'll ask quite intelligent questions about how it compares against other experiences, etc., and they'll be trying to understand the commerciality of the product. There are definitely other manufacturers where I think they are less sort of well versed in this space, and I think as long as you are, I think it'll be more about who else is in the game, what is their position in the game, when is the game coming out, and how much they're going to get, and it can be quite a business focused conversation, which is just the way it is with some companies.
Yeah, yeah, especially for folks who are working in the licensing side of business. In the end, they are bringing additional revenue for the brands that the company has. So, of course, the business focus is primary for them.
But it is interesting how some of the manufacturers, I would say a lot of them are very, that they are not really swayed by who else is in games. They will, um, they might be aware of it, but they don't necessarily worry about it. But I have, consulted for companies in the past where that's been a big thing. They've come to me and said, "Why are we not in this game?" And how can we get into this game? And it's quite interesting because like these are big companies, and you know, clearly that there is that competitive edge at the top, and I'm talking about like the very top of the company. It's quite fascinating. Um, but yeah, so it really depends on the individuals, I think, inside and their motivation and what's going on.
And then you worked, I mean, you worked for 13 years or 12 years with different um, car manufacturers. So how do you maintain that long relationship with these IP holders?
I mean, I think honesty and I mean, honesty is the number one. I think always being accessible, taking responsibility, and dealing with a problem if it arises. Things will arise from time to time, um, and I mean, I don't like to oversell something. So, we I think, like I said to you before about sort of being proactive and um, keeping abreast of things. I think I've definitely come across people in the past that have potentially looked to sign something up and want it signed. They kind of forget about the deal. You know what I mean? And I think this doesn't go for licensing. It goes really for any sort of deal making. People remember that stuff. So I think if you have a history of being a reliable business partner, somebody that they can trust, you retain confidential information, you don't share it, and then over time that buys you a certain amount of credibility that and people then are willing, I think, to take risks with you. Definitely, I think with top drives, a few people took risks because of my track record. Um, it was the concept as well, but I think the fact that the deal we were asking them to do, I think there were some brave decisions on their part because they did feel like they could trust us. Um, but yeah, I think that's probably the same in business in general. Treat people the way you want to be treated, and all of that sort of stuff. It's
About
not.
interpersonal relationship, like some like part of it is of course negotiating, reporting, being reliable business partner, but another part that may come up with other relationships in business, especially, is formulating relationship with the on a personal level as well, where that lowers the sort of a formality of communication. People can talk
Definitely.
openly. Do you should a studio basically invest more as well in formulating those relationships? So actually flying on the destination, spending some time with them, showing faces and showing they're not just people on the screen, sending papers to be signed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there were people that would go to far greater lengths than I would. But I mean, I do value face to face, and I think I've always, especially when you start a new project, I think if you can get that face to face time, I think it sends a stronger signal. Um, I, I've, I also try and I think you want to become more than just a name in an email. You want to be, a person, and so shaking hands, finding a little bit about them, having lunch with them, finding what football team they support, this sort of thing. Like I say, I don't think it's rocket science. It's stuff that a lot of people do outside of licensing, but it feels like it's those small things that can sometimes go a long way. Just making the effort. I mean, there are certain car manufacturers I remember where it's really difficult to get anywhere. Like, like you'd send emails, you'd ring them, and it like, and it, not necessarily these people are bad people. No, often they're just busy, and you every time I'd speak to them, they'd be like, "Yeah, I'm going to get to it. I've just got to do this and do that, and I'll do it tomorrow." And it never happens. And then I've said to them, "Right, okay, I'll fly to Sweden or I'll fly to Germany or wherever, and I'll come and sit." And you go, and suddenly that accelerates things like dramatically, and it's so it definitely, I think, makes a big difference. And we've got, we've now built out a team at Hutch. So I've got, 3 people working on licensing full time, and yeah, they've just built up such a strong rapport with the clients that we're working with, and we actually just sent some people out to Japan to meet a number of the manufacturers out there. And it just goes such a long way, because I think particular places like Japan, people don't, from the, Western developers don't necessarily visit very regularly. So I think they do really value that sort of thing. So yeah, definitely.
The other part that is important when you're formulating these interpersonal relationships is the showing the knowledge and the appreciation of their IP. So I assume that you and your team are probably car nuts. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say we've got a good combination throughout the studio, I think, of between people that are car enthusiasts and like racing enthusiasts, and then sort of just real gamers and gaming enthusiasts. And um, yeah, not everybody is into cars. And I think in the licensing team, it's similar. I think probably half of them are, I would say, they could definitely hold their own in any sort of car conversation. And then we've got a couple of people that are, they're sort of more familiar with sort of games and publishing, and less necessarily on specific car models. But I mean, you quickly pick this up when you're dealing with, number of manufacturers we are, that knowledge, sort of comes through by osmosis, and you find yourself talking car when you in your sleep. But no, I mean, it's like somebody like myself, I love cars, I love racing, and yeah, it's not really work, it's a joy to have these conversations. So for me, I mean, I think that's part of it. When I meet these people, you can talk enthusiastically about their product, and it's not selling, it's just authentic, right? And then that often opens up opportunity, because we're not just talking about cars on our list that we want. Other things sort of maybe come up, and that potentially opens the doors to new things for us to do. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't work with everybody. You know, not everybody wants to talk to a fanboy. So you have to know your audience. But yeah, I mean, it definitely helps, I think, in general.
How about the top mistakes you've done or you've seen other developers do when they pursue different brands?
So top mistakes, there definitely be times in my career where I think, I said about the, keeping people informed, and especially as design evolves. And I think in particular, I had this in like console development, where console development could be, a long time, and designs can change quite dramatically. And I've definitely been in a situation in the past where something had changed, and we probably, or we should have been more proactive in keeping like one of our partners abreast of what was happening, and finding out later that they were not as enthusiastic about that change, and then having to sort of pick that up and deal with that was definitely challenging. So I can share that from personal experience, that it's better to be upfront about these things. It's not just things changing. I think also some of the manufacturers super keen. When you do a deal, they want to see their content. Well, some of them want to see their content in the game. And like I said, there are certain manufacturers very enthusiastic, some of them not so. But if you sign content, then there's an expectation it's going to feature. And either, if it doesn't feature, because, sometimes things, you get an enthusiastic manufacturer that maybe feels like, well, I've given you all of this and I've helped you with that and blah, blah, blah. And now my car's not featured in the game. That can be problematic. Or you get a situation whereby you've negotiated terms so that payment is only subject to inclusion in the game, and then it's not been included in the game, and they feel like, well, hang on a minute, we did this deal and something's happened. And often those arise because, design evolution. So it's not necessarily something you can always prevent, but I think we are quite proactive with our internal development team in terms of, look, we sign this content, these guys are expecting this. So making sure not only the manufacturer is up to date, but also the development team are aware of the relationships. These are not just contracts that we've signed and stuff that we can just pick up and put down as we like. There are expectations attached, and I say it doesn't mean that we can compromise the product necessarily, but hopefully if things do change or people are maybe thinking about going in a different direction, you can get ahead of those sort of things. So a couple of examples there of things that I could share.
Yeah, so proactive communication, always very important in all kinds of partnerships. Last but not least, can you tell us what is your favorite car brand?
Oh, wow.
Or if there are some few.
Well, yeah,
I think Ferrari could be at least one based on the shirt that you're wearing. At least the racing.
I mean, I am such a big car guy, and my dream garage would need to be multi-story because I would need so many. But yeah, I mean, I love Italian cars. I love German cars. I'm a fan of a lot of different vehicles, depending on what the need might be. But yeah, I mean, like everybody, I mean, fast cars are normally my tipple if I had to choose something.
Yeah. Nice.
How about you, Misha? Have you got a favorite car?
I don't. I actually, I really don't care about cars that much. Like, I like reliable car that doesn't consume a lot of whatever energy it uses. So I have a German electric car, and I'm very non-passionate about it because I have two kids. We live in the north. And no matter what kind of a car you have, they will destroy it from the inside. I also have a pit bull. And so if I would have any kind of a car that I would have emotional ties to, which are many, like I'm a fan of G-Wagons and stuff like that, definitely. Cool. But they would like, it would be horrible to own that because I would see how they would look like my car looks now from the inside. So I'd rather not have anything that I really like. And then I just don't care that much. And I've sometimes, like, currently I don't have a leased, no, I actually have one leased car as well. But I like leasing a car because then also I don't care as much when it gets destroyed from the inside. But maybe one day when the kids are a little bit older, or when they, when I don't have to allow them to come into the car, I could get a car that I could actually care about.
Yeah, kids and cars don't really mix. It's a dangerous.
Exactly. I have a friend also who works in gaming, and he does have. I have actually a couple of friends who have those electric Porsches, and they are beautiful in the inside. But they have made the rules that this is Daddy's car, and no matter what happens to you, you are not allowed to. There's the estate Volvo over there. Yeah. That is for you, yep. And this is Daddy's car.
Yeah, so, that sounds like a very sensible solution.
Yeah, I'm not in that position where I could have. That type of a solution. So my car is my kid's car.
Very, very good. Very good. I think you've got your priorities right, to be honest.
Yeah. So that's my side of cars. But Peter, it was great having you on the podcast. This is a really interesting conversation because even though You are focused on car brands, but this same type of a conversation could apply to folks working with entertainment
Yeah,
IPs.
definitely.
It's a lot about managing your relationship with an IP holder, and as we know now in the games, it's almost a must to either have your own IP or to work with an IP of somebody else to get above, the get over the privacy challenges, and so for that, this approach that Hutch has is one of the most professional ones in the industry of how you work with IPs and have been working for over 10 years. So in that sense, I think this is a very valuable conversation, even though folks had to hear about the type of cars that we would like to drive.
Yeah, no, thanks. And you're right. I mean, we definitely see sort of spikes of interest when we release new car content and different manufacturers. So it definitely helps to drive interest. I would say just lastly, just in terms of entertainment brands, I think when you're licensing entertainment brands, I think they are more likely to be interested in the game and the fun factor than maybe car manufacturers, which I know we touched on earlier. Because I think obviously, fun and being entertaining is obviously, pretty key in sort of how you're, representing their characters or, IP is so sort of more closely linked. Yeah, so it's probably a more in-depth conversation there.
Yeah, it's the approval process is also different.
Yeah.
Oftentimes there's time pressure as well because if let's say you're working with Disney IPs, if they have shows coming out, then you want to promote those same characters in your game that the Disney Plus show is currently running. So those have to be clearly tied with their marketing efforts. So that added approval process can be quite heavy. But again, you have to be proactive. You have to have people on it. It's not just a free thing or not, it's never free, but it's not just a revenue share or upfront cost of using an IP. There's a lot of communication that needs to happen, especially if your plan is to use those assets in your promotional material. And now it sets also certain limitations of how you can promote it, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of approval process, and the bigger the IP holder, the more relevant the IP, the more communication is required.
Definitely, definitely. And I think it's probably some of the entertainment brands, it's more of a collaboration because obviously it's storytelling or, depending on what it is that you're working with. So yeah, it's probably a more full on investment and, some people might not recognize the experience that we have with sort of car manufacturers, but yeah, I'd say that's probably quite distinctive. Um, but yeah, I mean, obviously, that's maybe a talk on its own in terms of entertainment and talent, etc.
Yeah. So to cap this off, what's next for Hutch? Like, what are you looking forward in 24 and 25 really
We've got
as a newly appointed co-CEO?
well, we've got another title that's due to release very soon with NASCAR. We signed a deal with NASCAR last year. Haven't spoken to them for a while. Really excited to get something out with them. Obviously, we've had success with Formula One. NASCAR is huge in the US. I mean, the numbers are phenomenal, and yeah, we're excited to really try and sort of tap into that market a bit more. Obviously, it feels very well timed. They've just launched. I don't know if you've seen a series with Netflix.
Yes, I saw that. That's on my
Which
list.
I started watching last week, and is awesome. I really enjoy it. So yeah, it's actually really pumped me. I mean, I was excited about it anyway, but I feel like it's good timing. So yeah, that's a big thing for us. So that will be 4 live games that we're supporting. Once that game is live, and yeah, I mean we've got a few other irons in our fire. Sort of early validation. So yeah, we'll see. There's always a lot to learn with these things, but yeah, we're very busy.
Interesting that you're making the NASCAR game because Space Ape released Country Star game, and I would assume that is a very similar audience again.
God damn it! Yeah, there is definitely something in the water. But,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I heard that those guys were doing something with country music, and it sounds like a really smart move. So yeah,
Yeah, maybe you can connect with
yes,
some of the IPs or the music
yeah,
houses that they are connected
maybe
to,
some
and
cross
you can use
promotion.
those soundtracks. Yes, or soundtracks that you can
Yeah,
use in your
that's
game.
true.
So
That's true.
so country music and NASCAR. I don't know what goes better. Just put a beer brand to it, and you're good to go. And it's as real as it gets.
Yeah, yeah. We should reach out to them.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure Bud would be happy to sponsor.
Yeah, I don't think I've got that one on me, but yeah, I'll
Yeah, well, that's a European shirt. So, so, well, next time we'll be talking, and you'll be wearing a NASCAR
that
shirt with even more ads on
that's
it.
right. Yeah.
Looking forward to that. Looking forward to the success of the NASCAR title, and overall just growth and success of Hutch. I think it's a super exciting company. You've been really focused on one specific genre, but then growing your audience by not making same type of a games, but rather combining different type of games with that same expertise and the love that you have towards cars and racing. So really interesting to see the future games that you're doing.
Thank you. Really nice to do this. So thank you, Misha. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you everybody for listening, and you can catch Peter on LinkedIn and Hutch. Well, I'll link in the description. There's probably going to be open positions as those games are scaling. So yeah, Hutch Games and Peter Hansen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Misha. Take it easy.